My name is Jessica Chung, and I serve as a fellow at the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Educational Technology, or otherwise known as OET. I'm joined by my colleague Jisoo, and I'm going to quickly pass it to Jisoo to say hello.
Thanks, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jisoo Songs. As Rachel introduced, I serve as a digital equity advisor in the same office that Jessica serves in the Office of Ed Tech. Glad to be with you all today.
Awesome. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our office, the Office of Educational Technology develops national educational technology policy and establishes the vision for how technology can be used to transform teaching and learning, and how to make everywhere all the time learning possible for early education, K-12, higher education, and adult education. And today we would like to talk to you all about states' digital equity plans. So to that end, we're going to review some of the policy context regarding state digital equity plans. We're going to share some of the findings from our Advancing Digital Equity for All resource, which discusses community-based strategies and recommendations for advancing digital inclusion. We're also going to highlight examples of the role education can play in advancing digital equity, especially with respect to those state digital equity plans. And then we're going to share some resources and key steps for education leaders such as yourselves to get involved in those state digital equity planning processes. So ultimately, we hope that this presentation will help you consider how you or your organization or your agency can contribute to state digital equity plans to ensure that the needs and assets of the adult education sector are included. So first, to provide some policy context, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which passed in fall 2021, includes $65 billion in broadband investments. So we have an incredible opportunity through this funding to make home access to broadband and digital opportunities equitably and sustainably available at scale. This funding includes the Digital Equity Act programs, which are administered by the Department of Commerce, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA. So they're actually not administered by the Department of Education. However, these funds support the development of state digital equity plans. The funds go to governor's offices, or they have gone to governor's offices, and then governor's offices choose or have chosen which entity will lead the planning processes. So at this point, all states and several territories have already received their digital equity planning funds. Many of them received their funds this past November or December, and they have a year from the date they received their planning funds to complete their plans. So we expect all states to conduct outreach and develop their plans throughout 2023. As for what the digital equity planning grants involve and require, they require states to identify barriers, to plan how they're going to measure objectives and assess objectives with regard to how digital equity impacts and interacts with economic workforce development, educational outcomes, health outcomes, civic and social engagement, and the delivery of other essential services. They also require states to consider the needs of certain covered populations, which are listed on the slide, and they include individuals in covered households, largely lower income households, aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, individuals with a language barrier, individuals who are members of a racial or ethnic minority group, and individuals who primarily reside in a rural area. So as you can tell from this list, learners are not included in the list of covered populations. However, learners and their families and caregivers and their communities overlap with every covered population listed in the statute. So we see an opportunity or even a necessity for state digital equity plans to address the needs and the assets of the education sector in order to close the digital divide. So with this background in mind, and knowing that the Department of Education is not the lead federal agency on this program, some of the central questions we've asked ourselves are, what is the Department of Education's role in maximizing the impact of this $65 billion broadband package in the bipartisan infrastructure law, especially as state leaders develop plans for spending these dollars? And how can we, in the education sector, increase access for learners, families, educators, and communities that are the furthest from digital opportunities? And we also urge you all to consider, what role can you play in ensuring that state digital equity plans address and engage with the needs and assets of the adult education sector, especially adult education? So in response to some of these questions, we developed what we call the Digital Equity Education Roundtables Initiative, or the DEAR initiative, to support state broadband and education leaders with their digital equity planning and ensure the benefits of these historic investments in expanding broadband access reach learner. To support broadband and education leaders, we launched this initiative, which aimed to identify barriers to broadband and technology access for learners and communities, and to suggest strategies for leaders as they develop those digital equity plans from the bipartisan infrastructure law. The initiative particularly focused on learner communities furthest from digital opportunities, which overlap with some of those covered populations we discussed. So learners of color, Indigenous learners, learners in rural areas, learners in digitally redlined urban areas, and learners with disabilities. Our initiative was focused on what sort of barriers do those communities face, and what are some of the strategies for navigating some of those barriers. And so you can access more information on the DEAR initiative at the link on the screen, which I can also drop in the chat. And based on a set of learner-centered listening sessions that we hosted as part of the DEAR initiative, we used insights from those listening sessions to inform a publication called Advancing Digital Equity for All, and we're really excited to share this resource with you. I see Jisoo just dropped the link to the resource in the chat, so I encourage you to check it out. And in developing the resource, we found through our scan of the literature on digital equity in education, and through our listening sessions and one-on-ones with communities that are the furthest from digital opportunities and folks who serve them, we found that access is comprised of three critical elements, and we call them the 3 A's of availability, affordability, and adoption. And this is the framework that organizes the guidance resource. So we argue that for equitable access to happen, we need to ensure that all three aspects of access are addressed. We need to address availability, and that refers to the physical infrastructure that enables a given region to access broadband and other technology tools. We also need to address affordability, so whether or not families are able to pay for the cost of subscribing to and maintaining access to broadband and technology tools. And we also need to address adoption. So even when we solve for availability and affordability, we still need to think about the human level barriers that can enable or impede access in some communities, such as access to information, access to technical support, access to digital skills and literacy building opportunities. We also have to consider public trust and relationships that are necessary to encourage participation in public programs and services. And so while our federal colleagues at the Federal Communications Commission and NTIA tackle those issues of broadband availability and affordability, we saw an opportunity for the Department of Education and the education community to really drive the conversation around adoption, emphasizing the needs and the assets of the education sector in taking a human approach to digital equity. And so given their experiences navigating the pandemic, education leaders have invaluable experience in supporting the adoption of broadband and technology tools for learning. Education communities have developed and implemented adoption strategies such as co-creating solutions with communities, recognizing community members as the experts in the barriers they face, recognizing that community members can provide critical insights into what strategies will work or will not work. In addition, education institutions and education providers have these relationships of trust with communities that are so critical to driving public buy-in and adoption of solutions. Education communities have also provided inclusive technical support that's multimodal, multilingual, and accessible to individuals with disabilities. We've also seen the education sector building digital literacy skills and digital resilience. We know that it is not enough to give people internet access and devices. They also need access to digital skill and literacy building opportunities that are that meet their needs and meet the motivations of their communities, and that are ongoing as people continually leverage technology to meet their goals. We've also seen education serve as a trusted community asset and also leverage additional trusted community assets such as members of the community and other community anchor institutions to help meet people where they are and provide the information, technical support, and skill building opportunities that they need. For example, Digital Navigators has been a really successful model to increase technology adoption. We've also seen education institutions and communities helping to collect feedback and data that's so essential to advancing learning and improving programs and identifying what's working and should be scaled, as well as what's not working and needs to be modified. For some examples of how education organizations and institutions have been implementing these strategies, the Office of EdTech has actually been collecting and publishing examples of communities implementing strategies like these on our story engine. The link is displayed here, and there are more to come. So please keep an eye on our story engine for more stories of these strategies in action. And I will pass the mic to my colleague Jisoo.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica, for those highlights from our central guidance resource. So based on all this information that Jessica shared, we know that the education sector, especially the adult education sector, is composed of trusted community institutions, trusted providers of digital skill building opportunities, experienced experts in navigating digital equity barriers, and overall folks who have so much to offer as states develop their digital equity plans, particularly in advising strategies to drive the adoption of broadband and technology tools for learning. And we've been able to talk with a lot of different states over the past few months, and we were able to, with them, identify several examples where adult education is meaningfully engaged in the state digital equity planning processes. So I just want to shout a few out here. We had a chance to connect with the leadership from the Office of Future Work at the Colorado Labor Department, who's leading the digital equity planning process because they have a history of promoting digital skills development among adult learners. And Colorado has been also providing a digital equity and research opportunity grant to community-based organizations to make sure that they can collect insights on covered populations as they develop their digital equity plans. In Indiana, we know that the Adult Education Office that's in the Indiana Department of Workforce and Development division, they contribute to the state's asset mapping efforts, right? And they've been identifying partners that can help move the needle forward on digital equity. They also shared some survey data with the State Broadband Office about providers from the data they got from the adult learning providers about learners' educational attainment levels and their digital literacy levels as well. And then also we were able to talk to folks from New York. We know that the State Librarian's Office at the New York State Education Department is the co-chair of an interagency working group that advises the state broadband office. And they'll be the ones helping coordinate collaboration between the education and broadband leaders. For example, we know that they've been sharing data on learners' home connectivity, and they're also consulting experts that are in offices that serve both our indigenous learner populations and adult learner populations about some of the promising strategies necessary to move digital equity forward for those populations. So I know that was a lot of information that Jessica shared and I shared. So I think the bottom line question right now is, how can education leaders, like members of this specific group that's convened here this afternoon, contribute to the ongoing digital equity efforts happening nationally, right? So we brainstormed a few ways that education leaders can have an impact at the local, at the state and national level. So first, at the local level, we know that as trusted hubs of information, adult education providers can help promote the Affordable Connectivity Program, which provides qualifying households with a discount of $30 per month to help pay for internet bills and $75 per month for those in tribal lands. We've also seen ISPs, additionally committing to offer, ACP eligible families at least one high-speed plan for $30 per month or less with no additional fees and data caps. So that means that the households who use the ACP benefit to one of these plans would not have any sort of out-of-pocket costs for the internet. So this is a campaign that we're continuing to push on. Please share the information on the Affordable Connectivity Program with educators, learners, families, and caregivers and communities that you work with. We developed an outreach toolkit that's primarily aimed for the K-12 community, but it might provide some good thought starters for how the adult education sector can adapt these tools to promote the ACP as well. So really encourage you to check that resource out. And then again, at the local level, we really encourage education leaders to reflect on the barriers and strategies that are included in the Advancing Digital Equity for All guidance resource that Jessica talked about. How do those barriers resonate with the communities that you all serve? And how do the strategies that we call out, that we were able to aggregate, are those the same strategies that you've also found to be promising? And as you do so, keep up to speed on the stakeholder engagement efforts that are announced by your state broadband offices, maybe statewide surveys, listening tours, virtual stakeholder group meetings, and things like that. We know that many states have already announced these sort of listening tours, which might already be in your local area. So want to actually include a link to a blog here where we've been able to list some of those opportunities for input on the digital equity plans that some states have announced. So at the state level, we encourage you to find out who your NTIA federal programs officer is, as well as the key point of contact at the state broadband office by looking at the map provided by NTIA on their Internet for All website. We encourage you to consider reaching out to them and offering your support and expertise. One point of emphasis here, the Internet for All website lists all the state broadband offices and the key points of contact, but they may not be necessarily the ones leading the digital equity planning work, but they will certainly be a great place to start learning more. And then state broadband offices and those federal programs officers that are listed in the Internet for All map, they may be a good point of contact to learn about the efforts happening in the state to develop the digital equity plans. But we also know that a lot of state offices are new and receive a lot of different emails every day. So in reaching out to them, consider, what is the specific value add that your input can provide? For example, how could you help serve as an asset to the digital equity planning process by helping them compile relevant data, engage with those covered populations that Jessica talked about, identify promising practices, and eventually become a partner for them in implementing some of those equitable strategies? How can you ensure that the message is coming from, someone in a position of leadership or through a unified voice, maybe through a coalition, so that your questions and input can be most likely to be heard? And then we also encourage you to check with your points of contact at the state level if you have any, like at the state education agency or the state Department of Labor, to see if they've already successfully grabbed a seat at the digital equity planning table. We already know that several states are working in that interagency kind of capacity. So maybe you could discuss with your state contacts how you can best support their ongoing efforts if it's already underway. And then towards the summer, I believe, digital equity plans will start going through a 30-day public comment period. So we encourage you to consider participating in that process to further advocate for the needs of adult learners that are furthest from opportunities.